head to our next panel in the same finance category with Nicole and Zaina with, I think, some very interesting discussion around how companies can work. If the big companies aren't going to buy companies or fund them early, how do we move innovation forward? All yours.
Don't stop believing.
Thank you so much, Gil, and happy to be here. I'd love for our panel to start coming up so we can save some time. So we're going to have Andrew come up because we definitely want to ask him a ton of questions about that really positive presentation. And then we'd like to have Mariam Maghribi, who's the Chief Business Officer of Shifamed, to also come up. Kendra Hileman, Head of Instrumentation and R&D from Alcon.
And we'll have Sean Ianchulev, who's an innovator and founder of Eyenovia and Ianchulev. We're going to have Ramin, Valian, VP of Allergan, Eyecare, and AbbVie. And then Philip Kowalczyk, I did it right. He's VP of Business Development. J&J.
All right, thank you guys so much. And of course, we're going to start with Andrew, so be prepared for that first question. You know, I love the downward trend, decrease in private financing, decrease in, VC funding. How are we as physicians, and we can talk maybe if we can concentrate a little bit more on devices, because it seems like pharma's doing a little bit better than devices. Me as an ophthalmologist, not making these, I'm not the 4% in the room. I want my niche products. I want this innovation to come to market. I want to be able to, move forward with our patients. How can we do this? How are these companies able to, like you said, wait a little bit longer before especially going through exhaustive FDA trials that is pretty expensive? So really guide us. How are we supposed to get innovation?
Yeah, I think at a high level, it starts with the fundamental question: is the concept or the idea better positioned for for-profit dollars or research? And there's a big difference, and it has tremendous implications. So, shifting to what I tend to focus more on the for-profit side, it really more so now than in years past. It really comes down to truly understanding the use case. What is it solving? What does the competitive set look like? How differentiated it is, and what is a very specific go-to-market plan? How is it going to be commercialized? And from a regulatory standpoint, more so now than ever, at least in my conversations with companies and investors and strategics, there's a heightened focus on the regulatory process and understanding truly what is needed to de-risk the program, and how do you set the product up for success once it's commercialized? Because there's obviously reimbursement pressures, and so the concept of really understanding the commercialization of it is more sort of centerpiece now than it was in years past.
So, Ramin, you have some experience in this recently. How are larger companies funding these projects?
Yeah, look, if you look at it from our perspective, I think, the key driver is innovation in science. Science drives all our strategic investments. So that's really critical from a story perspective. So if you think about it, in the past, 18 months, we've made a lot of strategic investment in really innovative products. And most recently, I think we just had a panel talking about, for example, from a dry eye perspective, which yesterday we actually invested, or actually are working with Aldera in the dry eye market, right? So that's a pretty big step for us, dry eye. We're interested in dry eye. It's a big market, 38 million patients, only 10% are being treated today. So the market's going to continue with new innovations like an NCE with Repoxilab. That makes a key differentiation. But if you think about it also in other categories, retina is a great opportunity. Last year we worked with REGENXBIO. We're working on bringing the one and only first-time gene therapy in wet AMD. That's a significant milestone. And then also we had smaller deals in the surgical space with iStar last year. We made an investment about $16 million with iStar to really think about surgical space. So when you think about it from a strategic perspective, the fit is really important for us because we are into dry eye, we're into surgical space, we're in retina. And what we want to do is surround our portfolio, not only internally, but externally with all these strategic investments that really could get us into the next phase of innovation.
Well, so, we had this talk right before we got on the, in terms of the Aldira specifically, right? There was some results for the FDA. So it's about also the timing of investment of money that, and we wanted to get this panel. We have large strategic companies, which we really can't do the innovation without partnering with you guys. I mean, truly, us as ophthalmologists, most of us are here because of the innovation, because of all this exciting. But we also wanted small companies, and these are innovators and people who've thought of ideas. I mean, Mariam has 21 patents. Sean has done everything from retina to every field. So I really want to talk sort of more in detail about, that money is just coming later. And how can we, and Kendra, maybe we can sort of start with you, because I know J&J does it. There's different ways to also not necessarily purchase the product, but maybe there's different ways we can increase that.
Right. So we haven't really seen a decrease in what we're doing from strategic investments from BD&L. We do acquire later, that's for sure. We want to make sure that it's going to reach the market. But BD&L investments, for strategic investments, we still do a huge number of them. But we've actually implemented last year a new program to invest in smaller companies at earlier stages, because we thought that was a big miss. Right, that we were investing in companies that might have some clinical data already, but we implemented an Alcon seed fund, and the Alcon seed fund is to provide smaller investments at more early stage, even before they get any clinical results at all, in companies that we think have some promise and an innovative idea that we want to take more risk on in a smaller way. So Alcon seed fund is something that we implemented last year, and have already had several significant investments in that area.
So Philip, you're the head of U.S. development at J&J. How are you going to decide which small company or medium-sized company you're going to assist through this process?
Sure. And first off, I'm on a panel with people who are experts in the eye health space for years, and in a room with experts in the eye health space for decades, and it's humbling to be able to be up here. And I'm a longtime business development person across many parts of medtech. But this is a really unique experience here, and to have this subset talk about innovation, so it's just a really great opportunity, so thank you. In terms of how we think about things, it's pretty simple. I mean, we look at attractiveness and we look at fit. And at the attractiveness level, we start with unmet needs, and we start with, within those unmet needs, the science and the technology's ability to service those unmet needs. From there, we move on to market growth and market opportunity and, profitability ultimately. And then on the fit side, we're really focused at J&J on our ability to get to a number 1 or number 2 space in the category. And what is it going to take from an investment perspective to get there and to sustain there? And what other capabilities does the asset potentially bring? So does it bring option value to access into a highly innovative space or technology? And does it bring us new capabilities that we know we're going to need for the future but don't have today? And so that's how we look at any opportunity, whether it's early stage, later stage. And what we do is we apply different levels of weighting based on the stage of the opportunity. So obviously, if it's an early stage, very innovative technology, we're not going to focus as much on profitability at that stage. And we'll focus more on if it changes the standard of care, if it's taking cost out of the system. But that's kind of the rubric by which we look at any opportunity generally.
And Mariam, I mean, we had this conversation, I think it was about a year ago, that really sparked sort of the thought of this panel in the first place. I'd love sort of to hear your perspective, your new technology accommodating IOL, going through the actual testing, the FDA trials. Talk to us about your perspective from this. And, we heard that the strategics, are resounding. We're still putting money, we're inputting money, we're investing. I'd love to hear kind of from a different perspective, your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be on this panel and the opportunity. So I have 2 hats. I wear the Chief Business Officer for Shifamed hat, so I get to actually see across multiple industries, specifically in the cardiovascular as well as ophthalmology. We have 8 active companies, 5 in cardiovascular, 2 in ophthalmology, and 1 in enterprise software. So I get the full kind of gamut of seeing kind of both worlds, and I see definitely a stark difference between the 2 worlds in terms of how active strategics are at really taking the big bets earlier. And for me, I have the second hat as the CEO for Atia Vision, which is one of our ophthalmology company focused on an accommodating IOL. So for us, we're focused on really providing turnkey solutions for strategics. And for us, it's basically about having also a very healthy ecosystem for us to be able to foster more and more technologies in ophthalmology. So that means we need the investors, the strategics, as well as the regulatory bodies to all be collaborating to be able to get these innovations across the line. And like you said, right now, and what we heard earlier, it is basically taking longer for the strategics to really kind of dive in. And the question is, how can we actually bring up that trigger point where the innovators could do what they're very good at doing, which is basically innovating the products, providing the manufacturing facilities, and de-risking it from the clinical side, but then the strategic takes it through the full FDA as well as commercialization, and each party does what they're best at doing. And so that, for me, is really what I want to do in ophthalmology as well, because we see it in the cardiovascular space being healthy on that front. And so I would love to have that same model play out in ophthalmology.
I mean, maybe jump in with comments on that from the strategics before we...
So Sean, I don't think that anyone's done it better. You have gone everywhere from retina to dry eye to glaucoma. You're a Renaissance man, okay? So my question is, right now, cash is king, right? And clinical data may not mean as much as it used to mean. How do you see the path moving forward, in terms of getting funding? Is it private funding earlier on? What happens to these companies that are just trying to get through their trials, but they're running out of money?
Yeah, well, thank you. One of the things I hadn't done before was actually be on the public markets and rub shoulders with Andrew. So it's really been interesting perspective for me, being straddling the clinic innovation and actually through Eyenovia having taken a company public. So that gives you a certain perspective that I didn't have before. And it was great to hear Andrew's talk, which is absolutely, I don't want to recap, and also Wendy's perspective, because I remember being in San Francisco at the JP Morgan 2009, which was absolutely suicidal and depressing, and everybody was wondering, biotech CEOs were jumping off of the hotels, and then we recovered. And I think it's about, to me, that's less worrisome. When we talk about industry and the bigger firms supporting that, I totally appreciate their conflict in some ways, and it's a bit irreconcilable to have a company that's moving a big commercial organization be thinking like a small venture fund or company. It's very difficult to do, and I appreciate their efforts, but I feel organizations like the Visionary Ventures, for example, in my mind is a good modus operandi of how that would work. You almost have to give the strategics have to give some capital and put it into these intermediary venture funds that they can really take care of the business that venture funds take care of, which is really funding innovation, and really disengage a little bit, because it's very hard always not only to explain innovative ideas, but also to reconcile them with the business commercial priorities. So for me, I think I'm an optimist, so I can only convey that I think, yes, clinical data will always trump. And I think this reality means you have to really innovate, thinking about what is your deliverable and what you're solving, because Me Too products, as we've seen on the market, haven't been very well received. Commercial single product companies haven't been well received. People know that doesn't work to build a sales force around one or two products. And ultimately, when I've talked to a lot of investors, especially on the front of the eye, one of the problems is we haven't made them any money. When they look at how much money they've made in oncology or other specialties, retina has, although there have been some interesting blow-ups there too, but it's always good to go to those investors and say, well, they've already capitalized on that with other ophthalmic companies, and unfortunately, the ROI on the front of the eye innovation is not great. And Eyenovia is struggling with that too, because we're bringing a huge boulder. We're changing that eyedropper paradigm now that's been 100 years. And we're seeing some of the complications of eyedroppers today that are making the headline news and really hurting patients. So we need better technology, but people don't want to invest in platform. And when moments like this come up, they want to just see, show me what you're going to do for me tomorrow. And that is really challenging because when you deliver on a phase 2 or phase 3 data and you're thinking you're going to get rewarded so you can raise money on top of that, you don't. You actually, people sell on the news and you end up getting diluted. So certainly a challenging time, but I think I would advise everybody like us who are in the trenches, really build out your team, bring in great people to the board who know how it's done. And I keep saying it doesn't take a village, it takes a tribe. So definitely think about who is your tribe and how you're going to go out there, because it's definitely going to be a little harder for the next couple of years.
Yeah, Andrew, if you can.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. I didn't say my presentation, but it's pretty shocking that I saw a statistic the other day that 2/3 of the publicly traded, at least biotech companies, within the next quarter or two will have less than 18 months of cash. So you think about a financing overhang that transcends the public markets like that into the privates. This is really when you need industry collaboration, because as I think Jim asked me on the last panel, what gets us out of this? It's innovation, right? Innovation it's dirty, it's tough, you make mistakes, and a lot of times it's best done in these venture vehicles. But that has to be done in partnership with folks like you at the end of the room, because ultimately, if it's not, I think we all lose, because you miss that innovation cycle and the time it takes to really generate the proof of concept and getting to these markets.
Look, and I think there's a misnomer, right? Which is, I think what Sean was talking about is both strategics are looking for more immediate assets that are revenue generated. That's true to some extent, but it's not completely accurate, right? Because I think if you look at it from our perspective and your perspective, for example, we have AbbVie venture funds, for example, that's investing in very early clinical trials, right? If you look at it from a company perspective, we have a very active discovery program, but we do know that most R&D programs actually fail. There's more failures than successes, right? So you got to find the right balance of having early stage with late stage, right? And I think that's some of the things that we kind of see a lot, that some of the companies that are coming to us are looking more, they're a little bit scared to talk about early stage. And that's not really the way you should be approaching it. It's really about the science and innovation that makes a big difference.
Okay, so let's have a little fun with this. So Sean, you have your millionth product, and you're on the phone with Ramin. How are you? You're on an investor call. Like, how do you do that? Someone asked me to do an investor call. I was like, yeah, I know how to do that, and I called someone quickly. What are you going to do? What do you say?
Reminds me, I have to call Ramin more often. I mean, I personally would first say, what is the priority? And what are you looking for? Because I think that's really, they have to have a internal mandate. And another question I've learned to appreciate is, because a lot of business development people are interested to learn about everything and to kind of get educated, asking them what's their mandate is an important question, because they need to have an internal mandate if they want to invest, if you just want to educate them. So I think business development is a conversation, meaning you continue to converse with them. I think it's good to interact with everybody about your technology. But if you're expecting something, I think you need to get a little bit more acutely and surgically into,
It's like
you have a mandate to do that.
Know your audience.
And I just wanted to say one second thing is that to me, what's more concerning than all the finance part, which I think is going to play out independently because we still want to fund the innovation, what's more concerning is the new filter that's being put on innovation on top of the FDA, where now payers are now, so for FDA, we had to show something is safe and efficacious, and you get approved. And we know how difficult that is. What people, I think, realize, what we realize, kind of looking into the future is, and now payers are putting another filter, which is very euphemistically called reasonable and necessary. And we've seen that with MIGS, approved technologies, and we're going to see it a lot more. And I think that is really where Now you have to jump another hoop. So not only FDA approval, but now you have to show you're reasonable and necessary. And the process there is very new. It's not worked out as well as the FDA, so nobody knows what to expect. And to me, that will have a much more impactful effect, a non-symptomatic effect on innovation than, you know, banking and market crisis today that will probably change, and some of the finance sources that I think we're going to fix if somebody's paying for the innovation.
Well, and I think we have amazing panels coming up also about FDA endpoints that really goes to your point. And we have people coming from the FDA, you know, which is, you know, really, really important, Bill Wiley and then Malvina too. So I think that's going to be really great to have that discussion. Andrew, I want you to jump in. Again, one other point other than interest rates and all the reasons that, you know, funding is decreased is, you know, let's say those companies have purchased a product and then it's commercialized. Are the investors getting the return on investment, you know, in terms of the price point that they have invested? And also tell us about, in those calls, what do investors want to hear? I mean, you're that 4%, you know, and give advice to a smaller company or even a larger company, or innovation, or a person that comes up with an idea. What are the things to really concentrate on when you're discussing that?
Yeah, I think so. First off, again, it comes down to it's pretty simple. It's how innovative is the approach, and the good news is success is rewarded. If you do look at the average, again, M&A transaction, I think it's around $600 million in our sector. If you just sort of take just a plain vanilla average, and if you then look back historically and see where rounds get done and what the valuations are, not accounting for time, that does generate a return, and usually comfortably 2 to 3x. Some are much more, some are less. So I think the profit motive, the investment incentive is still there. I think collectively, because of this risk aversion and some of the points that Sean just mentioned, the bar is now higher for companies. I think you saw over the last, if I just wanted to maybe break that down a bit more, I think starting in 2015 or 16, there was a lot of funding going into the front of the eye. Dry eye was certainly, you know, part of that. And now that seems like it's gotten a bit overcrowded, but still a very significant market opportunity. And you've seen some of the return profiles suffer from that. Conversely, you know, retina has been receiving a tremendous amount of dollars, and you're seeing significant success, you know, rewarded in the marketplace. So I think, you know, disease modifying is an important part of it. So talking to investors, or I tend to talk more to venture capitalists like Wendy and others in the room, strategics, entrepreneurs, small companies. It runs the gamut of what the conversations could be like. But at its core, it's really about finding a very specific need, understanding a very specific use case, the capital to get to de-risking points, and we can have a whole conversation on what is viewed as de-risking. It seems like companies have different perspectives of it. And even if you sort of look at the oncology market as a whole, that's an industry that years ago, going back 15, 20 years, was seeing very iterative, but it started to get into new types of technologies. And now, because of the comfort level that a broad range of companies in oncology have with gene therapy, cell therapy, you know, DNA editing, RNA editing, mRNAi, they're more comfortable deploying big capital earlier. So that's why you see these big, splashy preclinical phase 1 companies, because they're comfortable in those sectors. We haven't gotten there yet in ophthalmology. The good news is, I think it's coming, but that's sort of the next wave of deal making that will happen.
Maybe the one thing to add to what Andrew, and this might be a little counterintuitive for me to bring this up, but the lack of the IPO market is a real challenge. In some ways, you know, as a BD person, we might say, oh, we like that because that's less competition for us when we're trying to acquire an asset. But at the end of the day, when we're trying to go earlier, and we have JJDC, which has been around for 50 years, that's invested billions of dollars into hundreds of companies, when we're trying to build that syndicate and we're trying to foster that earlier stage innovation and be part of that ecosystem, when that IPO market isn't there, it really does put a lot of pressure on a very few number of stakeholders, which is always going to leave some people disappointed.
Yeah, so Kendra, want to get into the conversation about internal R&D versus external R&D. And how do you decide which route you're going? Alcon's done a phenomenal job with both. How do you keep your internal R&D motivated while you're going out?
Yeah, we usually do a combination of both, actually, in any given space. We'll have external investments that we do, but we have some internal work as well. And to keep our R&D teams going and excited about what they're doing, we actually have an ideation focus. So we do crowdsourced ideation internally as well as strategic ideation. Crowdsource is where any of our Alcon employees, we get actually a lot of ideas from our commercial colleagues, but we have the crowdsource ideation that we meet on a regular basis and fund internally some really innovative new ideas that come from really anyone at Alcon. And then we have strategic ideation where we say we want to go after this specific area, and let's do a landscape of all the different companies that might be working in that area, as well as gathering all the internal ideas for that area. And so those strategic ideation programs have resulted in quite a bit of IP generation internally, but also some key partnerships with external companies where we've made investments based on that strategic ideation project.
And Mariam, I mean, you've heard a little bit sort of from the bigger companies about, and I loved your concept about sort of the ecosystem, and the health of the ecosystem is so important. Sort of, I'd love to hear, some of the obstacles, probably a strong term, but just, trying to take a product to market and some of the things to see. And again, with all the patents and all the technologies that you've been involved with, sort of your advice also for others, smaller companies.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the big thing is basically just making sure we have all the right players incentivized. I mean, what we heard earlier is there's a lot of strength in ophthalmology in the cell therapy, gene therapy, biotech side that's extremely strong, and then poor medical devices is the stepchild of ophthalmology. And that's, these are still big opportunities, and we just need to kind of figure out how do we get more focus around that, because to really have startups be thriving, you need the investors. And I would love to see like how many early stage investors we have in the audience that are focused on medical devices, not biotech, not gene therapy or cell therapy, because that's a big, that's going to be a big telling factor in terms of how healthy this area is. For innovation, you need those early stage investors. And for those early stage investors to really participate, you need to have healthy exits and competitive landscape. And this is where, we need the strategic to really take bets. And one of the things, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the cardiovascular leaders was saying that basically, they do multiple bets, and they know it's going to be somewhere in the 15 to 20% that those bets are going to pay off. So you have to know, going in knowing that you're going to take a risk, but at the end of the day, it is going to pay off, just because you're going to have from the 10 bets you make, you're going to have 2 of those really starring. And so for that, is important to also keep the strategic pipeline, because to have truly innovative products in the pipeline, you need to kind of continue that funding path.
Right, but we've seen these, I love what we're just talking about, because we've seen these niche products that as surgeons, we want so much, as clinicians. But how do we get strategics excited about it? We have this broad category of presbyopia. Well, I have it. It's really bad. And, I think
I've got
that
a solution.
I know. Well, there's better solutions, your lens. But I think that, we live for niche products, but strategics want revenue and they want more. So how do we reconcile that? Phil, help me. J&J, come on.
So your question is, how do we get strategic
Like, do you
excited
have a
about
separate,
opportunities?
do you have a separate little fund for niche
sure.
products?
So one of the
devices?
things I think that maybe is a benefit of J&J that maybe some pure plays in a single specialty suffer from is the ability to go early at scale. And when the model is reliant on many things to fail, a few things to hit, and those hits to outweigh the failures, it's tough sometimes when you're in kind of a smaller vertical, let's say a specific disease state, et cetera. So one of the constructs J&J has put together to help foster that innovation is these innovation centers, right? And these are global kind of innovation centers, labs that focus on mentorship, that focus on early stage investment, that focus on some lab space, access to clinical resources, et cetera. And I've got to be honest, I don't know that model would work for us if we were just doing it in ophthalmology, because you wouldn't have the scale to invest in the infrastructure to allow you to do that. Because we're across devices and pharmaceuticals, that is a model to go very early. JJDC, which is our venture arm, and is another model that we'll go as early as Series A. I'd say the majority of investments are later stage investments, but a lot of them or some of them will go as early. And at the end of the day, they're a strategic investor, right? So the idea is it is a vehicle for us to put in money at an earlier stage that ultimately will help some of those opportunities progress to being acquired. We recognize that many of them won't, but it helps kind of establish that funnel for us. So, and then obviously, when we come in to acquire, we want it to have a big, meaningful impact on Johnson & Johnson. I can tell you one of our main priorities as J&J across medical devices is to move into higher growth areas of the portfolio. I can say, and we kind of define higher growth as above 6%. 4 or 5 years ago, about 18% of our portfolio was in that segment. Now it's about 50%. And so that is kind of one of the big objectives that we have as we kind of go from early to later to ultimately would help us decide whether or not we're going to acquire.
I'd like to ask a question of everybody. Sorry to cut you off, but who is part of a small company that's trying to kind of in that process of getting a device, not a pharma, approved? If you can raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. And kind of to that point, number one, thank you to the program committee and including an anterior segment surgeons who love innovation and that aren't part of a retina pharma, which is getting all the money. So we had to represent a little bit. But if everybody here can give one piece of advice to these companies who are listening to this, I mean, they're at this innovative meeting for support. I mean, I thank the strategic companies because without you, we can't do what we want for our patients. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I thank the small companies and the innovators because you come up with ideas that truly make our life and our patients' lives better. So one piece of advice, kind of go down for these companies to succeed. Start us off, Andrew, with give us the money, but you don't have to say anything else. No, just kidding.
Balance sheet stability trumps share dilution, meaning raise the money, care less about the valuation.
For me, I think we're in San Francisco, so I'll say something from Mark Twain, a quote which I come to realize a lot more with the public markets I know, is there is very little to be learned from the second kick of a mule. So very quickly figure out what you need to do and move as quickly as you can, understanding the reality, because I know we talk about gene therapy and it's all the great excitement now, and it probably funds a lot of this innovation. But 10 years ago, people were saying, well, there's great gene therapy ideas that nobody wanted to invest in. So money's just going to follow where there is a good intersection between technical feasibility, reimbursement, and innovation. And ultimately, today is one thing and tomorrow will be another. But I think the most important thing is you need to be more brutally honest with what works and what doesn't work and move on.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what's been said in terms of focus on what's going to be adding to the bottom line of your value proposition and hunker down. It is, it is tough times. So just, manage your cash very, very well.
All right, I'm going to take a little bit different approach. I think some good advice for the startups that we look at acquiring is, are they going to get approval in the time frame that they said? And are they going to get reimbursement? So my advice would be, look, the landscape has changed, the regulatory landscape. EU MDR has changed the rules in Europe. You have to have clinical data to enter into Europe. You can't go to Europe with your product first under a CE mark that didn't take much, and then try to get the data that will support an FDA clearance or approval. You've got to get data in Europe, and the regulatory landscape in the US has also changed a bit, right? We still have 510K, we still have PMA for devices, but the study designs that are expected to support those submissions are more rigorous. They look more like a pharma study would, with real controls. So make sure you're getting good regulatory advice and understanding what's going to be required from a clinical aspect, because that's going to change maybe when you can enter the market and what it will take from an investment side to get there.
I mean, I'll echo everybody what they said about realism, about just being upfront. I think the other way of looking at it also is the question should also be from a strategic perspective. A lot of times we get things that are operationally really hard to execute, right? And if I have to change my operational model, that's a very difficult thing to do, right? So the fit has to be there, but also if the innovation is there, there's got to be some consideration that we probably have to look at our operations very different. And most people think, well, you're in eye care, so it should be really easy. But most opportunities are not an easy fit from an execution standpoint, unless you change your operating model.
Couple of things on my end. One would be to start early. I think it's, if the first conversation we're having is asking us to write a check, it's always a lot easier to say no than yes. And so I think that's kind of important for us. I think the credibility around hitting your milestones and demonstrating that is important to us. At the end of the day, any of these decisions is a leap of faith, and being able to tie back to what the company has done and said they were going to do and do is important to us and how we make a decision. And then, you know, finally, I would say stay in touch. I think a no isn't always a no. Obviously, strategic priorities shift, market conditions shift, et cetera. And so it's always important to keep that connection alive.
That's great. So thank you so much to our panelists for helping us understand the complexity of this road to innovation and funding, and giving us hope that there may be some innovation coming our way very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So this is going to be a networking break for 30 minutes. We want to thank all of our sponsors. Please go ahead and have these discussions. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you. Can we have